Without wasting your time, let's continue listening to part 2 of the case Obsession with Daughter's Boyfriend Ends in Tragedy. Described him as a charming boy but minimized their relationship, referring to him only as my daughter's boyfriend. However, as the interrogation continued, her facade began to crack. When Duvall pressed her about the affair, Poet's demeanor changed drastically. She became defensive and her answers grew short and curt. At first she denied the affair, but when confronted with evidence she broke down. Tears began to roll down her face as she confessed to the affair, but she adamantly denied any involvement in Brandon's murder. "He was my angel," she sobbed. "I swear to God I would never hurt him." Despite her emotional outburst, Detective Duvall wasn't convinced. Pet's obsession with Brandon and her intense jealousy of her daughter made her the prime suspect. The second suspect in the investigation was Lee Gerard, Pet's 18-year-old daughter and Brandon's girlfriend. Lee was a bright, ambitious young woman who had just graduated from high school in June 2021. She was excited to start college in the fall with plans to study business administration at the University of New Orleans. Friends and family described Lee as kind-hearted but sometimes overshadowed by her mother's dominant personality. Lee and Brandon had been dating for 2 years and, by all accounts, they were deeply in love. They had even talked about getting married after Lee finished high school, a plan that had excited both families in their conservative southern town where the average age for marriage was 18. However, the revelation of her mother's affair with Brandon had shattered lives. The discovery of the betrayal left her heartbroken and full of rage, but she claimed to have had nothing to do with Brandon's death. When the detectives questioned Lee, she looked emotionally drained. She wore jeans and a t-shirt from her high school class, making her seem much younger than she was, almost childlike in her grief. Detective Duvall and Detective Martinez began the interrogation, gently asking her to recount her relationship with Brandon and how she discovered the affair. Lee's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes welling up with tears. She described how she had accidentally stumbled upon sexually explicit text messages between her mother and Brandon just days before his death. The discovery had led to a heated argument between her and Paulette, but Lee claimed she had tried to move past it. "I loved Brandon and didn't want to lose him," she said almost in a whisper. However, when asked about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, Lee's story became less clear. She insisted that she had been at a sleepover at her friend Taylor's house, just a few blocks from Brandon's home, but she struggled to provide details about the night. Taylor, when questioned separately, confirmed that Lee had been there, but mentioned that Lee had left around midnight, a few hours before the estimated time of the murder. As the detectives pressed further, Lee's attitude shifted from sorrow to defensiveness. She denied any involvement in Brandon's death, but the anger in her voice was evident. "I would never hurt him," she repeated, though her hands trembled as she spoke. When shown the evidence of the affair, including the explicit messages from Paulette to Brandon, Lee broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Her pain was palpable, but it also raised suspicions. Was she mourning the loss, or was there something more she was hiding? Despite her emotional state, Lee maintained her innocence. Throughout the interrogation, she admitted to feeling betrayed and angry, but insisted she wasn't capable of murder. However, her shaky alibi and the intensity of her emotions left Detective Duvall with lingering doubts. The third suspect in the investigation was Rick Gerard, Lee's father and Pet's husband. Richard, 47, was a well-known attorney and material, recognized for his sharp legal mind and his ability to win cases, though also for his tendency to be absent from home due to his demanding work schedule. Richard was a man who valued appearances. He took pride in maintaining a perfect family image, even if it meant turning a blind eye to the issues brewing in his own household. Although Richard was often at the office or in court, he wasn't completely unaware of the tension and sexual jealousy games between Paulette and Lee. Had his suspicions about Pet's inappropriate sexual interest in other men, but he chose to ignore it, hoping the situation would resolve itself. When the police called Richard in for questioning, he arrived composed, dressed in a crisp white shirt and tie, as if preparing for a day in court. Detectives Duvall and Martinez began the interrogation by asking Richard about his relationship with his wife and daughter. Richard described his marriage to Paulette as complicated, but insisted they had a strong bond and maintained a regular sexual relationship. He claimed his relationship with Lee was also good, though he admitted they weren't as close as he would have liked, partly due to his long work hours. The detectives then shifted the focus to Brandon Tibito. Richard admitted to liking Brandon and seeing him as a good match for Lee. However, when confronted with the affair between Brandon and Paulette, Richard's demeanor changed. He clenched his jaw and avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. He claimed he hadn't known about the affair until after Brandon's death, stating, "If I had known, I would have stopped it." Immediately, the detectives pressed Richard about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He stated that he had been working late at his office reviewing a case file for an upcoming trial. He provided the names of colleagues who could confirm his alibi, but his tone was defensive. Richard's response to the interrogation was calm but distant, giving the impression that he was hiding something. As the interrogation continued, Richard maintained his innocence, insisting that he had nothing to do with Brandon's death. However, his reluctance to discuss the affair and his apparent detachment from the situation left the detectives uneasy. Was Richard truly unaware of his wife's actions, or was he hiding something to protect his family's reputation? Despite his calm exterior, Richard's evasiveness during the questioning raised suspicions. The detectives couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than he was letting on. On a scorching afternoon in mid-August 2021, the police received a tip that would change the course of the investigation. Around 3:00 p.m., Detective Duvall's phone rang. The informant, who wished to remain anonymous, claimed to have critical information about Poet Gerard, one of the main suspects in the murder of Brandon Tibito. The informant hinted at something far more sinister than just an affair, a secret that Paulette had been hiding for Years the detectives wasted no time. They drove straight to Pet's office, located in a small nondescript building on the outskirts of Metairie. The sign above the door read Beauty Buys. The name of the multi-level marketing business Paulette had been running for nearly a decade. From the outside, the office looked like any other small business, but inside, the detectives would uncover a shocking twist. As they entered the office, the detectives were struck by the eerie silence. The place was filled with beauty products shelves, lined with creams, lotions, and makeup, but there were no employees in sight. Detective Martinez noticed a locked door at the back of the office. After some persuasion, Pet's assistant, a nervous young woman in her early 20s, reluctantly handed over the key. Behind the door was Pet's private office, and what the detectives found inside was both disturbing and revealing. The walls were covered with photographs, many of them of Brandon, most of them sexually explicit and inappropriate. In one corner, there was a kind of makeshift altar dedicated to him, complete with candles, trinkets, and handwritten notes. It was clear that Pet's obsession with Brandon went far beyond a simple affair, but that wasn't all. As the detectives searched the office, they came across a stack of documents that exposed the dark side of Beauty Buys. The marketing scheme wasn't just a business. It was a scam that preyed on poor women in the South, many of them single mothers struggling financially. The documents revealed that Paulette had been exploiting these women, convincing them to invest thousands of dollars in beauty products they couldn't sell, while forcing them to work up to 20 hours a day to pay off their debts. The financial strain had ruined hundreds of lives, leaving these women in desperation. The discovery of Pet's fraudulent practices provided a new motive for the murder. Pet's world was beginning to unravel, and the pressure to maintain her image, combined with her obsessive love for Brandon, may have driven her to commit murder. With this new evidence, the police had a clearer picture of Paulette Girard, a woman who would do anything to protect her secrets, even if it meant committing murder. The detectives knew they were getting closer to the truth, but they also realized that uncovering the full extent of Pet's crimes wouldn't be easy. On August 21st, 2021, the police in Tye, Louisiana were finally ready to act. After gathering the evidence, including the disturbing revelations in Poet Girard's office, there was no doubt about what was responsible for the brutal murder of Brandon Tibito. Poet, 43, had become increasingly sexually obsessed with her daughter's boyfriend, leading her to commit an unthinkable crime. The night of the murder, Paulette confronted Brandon in the kitchen of his grandmother's house, a place where Brandon had taken her several times for secret encounters. Driven by jealousy and fear of losing control, Paulette grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Brandon multiple times. The attack was savage, leaving him with deep wounds and his eyes nearly gouged out. After the murder, Paulette attempted to cover her tracks, but her obsession with Brandon and her fraudulent activities eventually led the police straight to her. The arrest took place in the early hours of the morning. On August 21st, police arrived at Pet's luxurious home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Just as the sun was rising, they knocked on the door, and Paulette answered, still dressed in her silk pajamas. Clearly not expecting visitors, the detectives calmly informed her that she was under arrest for the murder of Brandon Tibito. Poet's reaction was a mix of shock and defiance. She tried to maintain her composure, but the police could see the panic in her eyes as Paulette was handcuffed and led to the police car. Her neighbors watched in disbelief. Many of them had admired Paulette for her business success, unaware of the truth behind her glamorous facade. Her arrest spread quickly through the community, and by the time the police car pulled away, the streets were already buzzing with gossip. Back at the station, Paulette was booked and placed in a holding cell. The detectives interrogated her, but to find out how the case ends, please stay tuned for the final part in the next clip. Thank you very much for listening.